This week, we continue our look into the life of William Shakespeare by exploring the life and times of one of his most famous contemporaries, that of Sir Walter Raleigh. This week, we're asking, did Shakespeare know about Sir Walter Raleigh? Born in the 1550s, he would spend his 20s fighting against the Irish Rebellion, going on to rise in the ranks of the court of Elizabeth I, being knighted in 1585, and establishing himself as a favorite of the Queen. Sir Walter Raleigh was instrumental in the English colonization of North America. He was given a royal patent to explore Virginia specifically, and that charter said that he had 7 years to establish a settlement or lose the right to explore there at all. Raleigh and Elizabeth I intended that venture to return riches of gold to England. Interestingly, Sir Walter Raleigh himself never visited North America specifically. He was constantly looking for the El Dorado, or the city of gold. He thought that he would find it, and he looked for it mostly in South America. Although he was in charge of sending groups to Virginia, specifically, he sent the group to the Roanoke colony, which would go on to become the Lost Roanoke colony. You can find out more about that group in another history episode that you'll find a link to in the show notes for today's episode. In 1591, Raleigh had secretly married Bess Throckmorton, or also called Throgmorton sometimes. She was one of the Queen's lady-in-waiting, and he didn't have permission to marry her. So when Elizabeth found out, she was furious, and she dismissed Bess from court and said she's not allowed to be here anymore, and she actually locked Sir Walter Raleigh up in the Tower of London. He was finally released from prison in August of 1592, and put in place of managing an expedition to attack the Spanish coast. He returned from that expedition with a big prize for England, the incredibly rich merchant ship named Madre de Deus off Flores. Raleigh was sent to organize and divide the spoils of this ship, and then sent back to the Tower, where he stayed until 1593, when he was released and actually became a member of Parliament. He would stay married to Bess Throckmorton, and they actually had 3 children together. The first one died from the plague in 1592, but he would go on to have 2 more sons with her, Walter and Carew. 1593, he retired to Sherborne Lodge, which was a house that he built, basically moving into retirement and deciding to live the calm life, but it wasn't to last. In 1594, he heard about a city of gold in South America, and he just couldn't resist chasing that El Dorado one more time. So he sailed back to South America looking for it. He was exploring what's now known as Venezuela and a section called Guyana. And in search of this El Dorado, he would go on to publish a book called The Discovery of Guyana. The book actually is where we get the El Dorado legend. While Venezuela does have gold deposits, there's been no evidence that Sir Walter Raleigh actually found gold mines there. And sometimes he's given credit for having discovered Angel Falls, but then there's other people who think those claims are really far-fetched. By the time Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, King James didn't like Sir Walter Raleigh very much, and he was accused of treason in 1603. Just a few months after Queen Elizabeth died, James had him arrested for treason. At his trial, Raleigh conducted his own defense. The chief prosecution against Sir Walter Raleigh was a written testimony, and Raleigh demanded the man who wrote this testimony be cross-examined in court, and they wouldn't allow the man to show up. So Raleigh never got to confront the guy, and Raleigh was convicted anyway. But James I did spare his life. He was not given a death sentence at that time. However, he did stay imprisoned in the Tower until 1616. Remember, 1616 is when William Shakespeare died. So the rest of this happens after Shakespeare's lifetime. But in 1616, Raleigh was released and one last time given a chance to explore El Dorado. Personally, I think James was just looking for a reason to get him out of the country. These kinds of expeditions were highly dangerous, and it was very likely that Raleigh would not return from the expedition at all, because at this point, Raleigh is getting on up in years. And so James was probably just kicking him on out. But he did say, if you go and look for El Dorado, you cannot get involved in any hostilities. You can't start fights, and you can't be the problem. Well, Raleigh was trying to follow these rules, but the people that constituted his crew weren't necessarily following the rules themselves. And actually, a detachment got in a fight, and angered Spain. And so when Raleigh got back to England, he was arrested and sentenced to death for starting the mess up with Spain. And James really couldn't say anything about it because Raleigh had very clearly broken the rules of his agreement to go and look for El Dorado again. Raleigh was given lots of opportunities to escape and didn't take them. Instead, he very nobly went to his death and was beheaded at Old Palace Yard at Westminster in October of 1618. After he died, his head was embalmed and his body was buried, and his embalmed head was given to his wife. His wife carried his head around with her until her death. 29 years later, this woman carried her dead husband's head around with her for 29 years. When she did finally die, Sir Walter Raleigh's head joined the rest of his body and was buried all together at St. Margaret's Church in England. Sir Walter Raleigh is remembered for bringing tobacco, potatoes, and tea to England, which makes him quite significant because I believe tea is almost synonymous with being English. And all of this he did during Shakespeare's lifetime. If you'd like to see where all of the adventures of Sir Walter Raleigh overlaps with the life of Shakespeare and what Shakespeare was doing during the various 1592, 93, and 94 that major events were happening in Sir Walter Raleigh's life, you can download the Timeline of William Shakespeare, which shows all of these events and more, especially where England finally gets tea for the first time during Shakespeare's lifetime. You can download that at the link below this video. That's it for this week. Thank you for being here. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. Don't forget that you can watch more history episodes and my first set of Shakespeare documentaries all on Amazon Prime. Those are available there. You can search Cassidy Cash Shakespeare History to find more. And if you would like access to the entire library of Shakespeare resources, not just this timeline available today, but all of the ebooks, maps, diagrams, instructions for playing 16th century games, and more, you can get access to that by subscribing to the channel. You can find out more about that at CassidyCash.com/member. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.